Title: This house sent letters saying, "I'm watching your children, a real case." Before you look away, before you tell yourself this can't be real, subscribe, like, and comment now, because what you're about to hear is not a campfire story, not a rumor, and not fiction. This happened to a real family, in a real American town, in a house that still stands today. And once you hear what followed them home, you'll understand why some doors should never be opened. In the summer of 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus believed they had found the house that would finally anchor their family. It was a large, quiet home on a tree-lined street in Westfield, New Jersey. A place with history, charm, and enough space for their 3 young children to grow up safely. The kind of neighborhood where people waved, lawns were trimmed, and nothing ever seemed out of place. They hadn't even moved in yet when the first letter arrived. The envelope was handwritten. No return address. Inside was a message addressed simply to the new owner. At first, it sounded almost friendly. The writer welcomed them to the neighborhood and claimed to have been watching the house for years. Then the tone shifted. The letter spoke about the home's past, about how generations had lived there, and how the writer's family had been assigned to watch it. Toward the end, a chilling question appeared, asking whether the children had moved in yet, followed by a sentence that made Derek's stomach drop. The writer said they were watching the children. The letter was signed only as the watcher. At first, Derek tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank, a disturbed neighbor, someone trying to scare them away. But as the days passed, more letters came. Each one grew more personal. The watcher knew details that shouldn't have been public. The layout of the house, renovation plans, the fact that contractors were coming and going. The children were referenced again, not by name, but by number. The letters asked where they slept, which rooms were theirs. The tone was no longer curious. It was possessive. Derek and Maria had not yet moved in, but they were suddenly afraid to do so. They contacted the local police. Officers reviewed the letters and advised caution, but there was little they could do. The letters contained no direct threats, no demands, no fingerprints, no DNA that led anywhere. The handwriting was neat, controlled, deliberate. Whoever was sending them wasn't acting impulsively. They were patient. The family installed security cameras. They alerted neighbors. They began to watch the house the way someone watches a stranger who knows their name. Every sound at night felt louder. Every passing car felt suspicious. Even during the day, the house felt wrong, as if it were aware of them in a way they couldn't explain. One letter mentioned that the house missed the young blood that would soon fill it. Another referred to the walls and floors, suggesting they held secrets. The watcher spoke as if the house were alive, as if it had been waiting for the Broaddus family specifically. The letters weren't frantic or angry. They were calm, observant, confident. That confidence was the most frightening part. Neighbors were questioned. Some were helpful. Some were offended. No one admitted to anything. Investigators considered former residents, nearby homeowners, even construction workers. Nothing stuck. The letters kept coming, often after visible activity at the house, suggesting the sender was close enough to see what was happening in real time. Maria became afraid to be alone. Derek began checking the cameras obsessively. The children were kept away from the property entirely. What was supposed to be a new beginning turned into a waiting game filled with dread. They hadn't even slept a single night in the house, yet it already felt contaminated by something unseen. As months passed, the family made a painful decision. They would not move in. They couldn't. The idea of raising children in a place where someone claimed to be watching them was unbearable. They attempted to sell the house, but even that became complicated. The letters had to be disclosed. Potential buyers backed out. The house sat there, silent, beautiful, and unwanted. And through it all, one question remained unanswered. Who was the watcher? No one was ever arrested. No definitive suspect was named. The letters stopped eventually, but the fear didn't. To this day, the identity of the watcher remains unknown. The house still stands. Families still pass by it. But for the Broaddus family, that place will always be remembered not as a dream home, but as the place where someone proved that the most terrifying threats don't always break in. Sometimes they write, after the decision was made not to move in, the house didn't become quiet. In some ways, it became louder. Not with sound, but with tension. Derek and Maria tried to return to normal life, but everything revolved around the letters. Every unknown envelope in their mailbox made their hearts race. Every phone call from an unfamiliar number felt like it could be connected. The watcher had never identified themselves, but they had succeeded in something far more powerful. They had inserted themselves into the family's daily thoughts. The police investigation continued, but it moved slowly and without confidence. Officers canvassed the neighborhood again, this time asking more pointed questions. Who walked their dog at night? Who spent long hours at home? Who seemed overly interested in the renovations? One neighbor mentioned an older man who liked to sit outside and watch the street. Another mentioned a family who had lived nearby for decades and knew the history of every house. Nothing rose to the level of evidence. The letters, however, suggested something chilling. The watcher didn't just know the house. They knew when people were there. One letter referenced fresh paint before it was publicly visible. Another commented on contractors working inside the home, even though the blinds had been closed. That meant someone was watching closely, from an angle the family couldn't identify. At one point, the watcher asked why the family had changed plans. Why the children weren't there yet. The wording was calm, almost disappointed. As if the house had been promised something and had been denied it. Derek began to wonder whether the letters were less about him and more about the house itself. The watchers spoke of the home as if it were a living thing. They described how they had waited patiently for new occupants, how the house needed young blood to wake it up again. They spoke of generations passing through its rooms, as though they had been present for all of it. The implication was terrifying. Either the watcher was deeply delusional, or they had been watching that home for a very long time. As pressure mounted, the Broaddus family tried to fight back. They hired private investigators. They consulted handwriting experts. They attempted to trace the envelopes. One letter was processed and revealed DNA, but it belonged to a woman. That detail complicated everything. Was the watcher a woman? Or had someone else simply handled the letter? The lead went nowhere. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread. News of the letters leaked, and the quiet town of Westfield became the center of unwanted attention. Neighbors whispered. Strangers drove by the house. Some people accused the family of exaggerating the story. Others suggested the letters were an elaborate hoax, possibly even written by the homeowners themselves. That accusation cut deeply. The family was already losing sleep, money, and peace of mind. Now they were losing trust. The watcher, however, seemed unaffected by the scrutiny. The letters continued sporadically, their tone unchanged. They never lashed out. Never demanded anything. They simply observed, commented, waited. At one point, a letter arrived that mentioned the children directly again. It asked if they had begun sleeping in the house yet. The wording was careful, but the message was unmistakable. Someone was thinking about where those children would lay their heads at night. Maria later said that was the moment she truly broke. Not from fear, but from helplessness. There was nothing she could do to make the letters stop. No one she could confront. No threat she could prepare for. The danger was invisible, undefined, and persistent. The house itself became a burden. Mortgage payments continued. Taxes piled up. Selling it meant explaining everything. Renting it felt irresponsible. Leaving it empty felt like giving the watcher exactly what they wanted. A house waiting, silent, available. Derek drove past it often. Sometimes at night. Sometimes during the day. He would sit in his car and stare at the windows, wondering if someone was staring back. He checked the cameras repeatedly. They never caught anyone. No trespassers. No suspicious movement. Just a perfectly normal house, standing quietly on a perfectly normal street. That normality was the most disturbing thing of all. Because whatever was happening didn't look like a crime. It looked like patience. The investigation slowly stalled. Police admitted they were out of ideas. No laws had been broken. No suspect could be named. The watcher had done exactly enough to terrify, but not enough to be stopped. And as time went on, one question began to haunt the family more than any other. If the watcher was willing to wait this long, how long were they prepared to keep watching? By the time the investigation began to fade, the Broaddus family realized something far worse than the failure to catch the watcher. The letters had changed their lives permanently. Even after months passed without new mail, the sense of being observed never fully disappeared. Fear had rewired how they thought, how they slept, how they trusted. They eventually decided to rent the house. It was not a choice made lightly. Letting another family live there felt risky, but keeping it empty felt unbearable. The Broaddus family disclosed the letters to potential tenants, hoping transparency would ease their conscience. Some walked away immediately. Others believed the danger had passed. For a short time, it seemed like maybe it had. Then the anxiety returned. Although no new letters arrived addressed to the tenants, Derek couldn't shake the feeling that the watcher was still nearby, still paying attention. He continued driving past the house. He continued checking news reports. He continued wondering whether silence meant the threat was gone, or simply waiting. The family became consumed by one final question. Was the watcher a person, or was the watcher someone who would never be identified because they blended perfectly into the neighborhood? Years after the first letter arrived, journalists and investigators revisited the case. Theories emerged. Some believed the watcher was a nearby homeowner with an unhealthy fixation on the house. Others believed it could have been multiple people, or even someone connected to the property's past. There were rumors of former residents who felt entitled to the home, of neighbors who resented change, of individuals who enjoyed psychological control more than physical harm. But no theory ever became proof. What disturbed experts most was how effective the letters were without ever escalating. No break-ins, no vandalism, no direct threats. Just enough detail to demonstrate access and awareness. Just enough restraint to stay within the law. The watcher didn't need violence. Fear was enough. Maria later described how the letters felt like a voice whispering into their lives, one they could never locate or silence. Even when the family moved on physically, mentally they remained trapped in that first sentence, "Welcome, my friends." The house was eventually sold at a loss. Another family moved in. The neighborhood returned to its routines. Children played outside. Cars came and went. From the outside, nothing about the home suggested horror. But the story never truly ended. Because what made this case unforgettable wasn't the letters alone. It was the realization that the threat didn't come from darkness, or isolation, or some distant place. It came from familiarity, from routine, from a place designed to be safe. The watcher never revealed themselves. They were never caught. They were never confirmed to have left. And that is why this case continues to haunt people who hear it. Not because it proves something supernatural. Not because it ends in tragedy. But because it proves how easily fear can enter a life without permission, and how impossible it can be to remove once it does. Somewhere, there is a mailbox being checked right now. Somewhere, a family is unlocking a front door they believe belongs to them. And somewhere, someone may be watching quietly, patiently, convinced that what they're observing was never meant to be private at all. The most terrifying part of this story isn't what happened. It's what never stopped being possible.